Alright, what's up guys? I'm gonna do another one of these question answering things. Hit my minimum number of questions, although a little bit less than usual. So, gonna be a little bit quicker, all good. If you guys have any questions, as usual, leave them in the comments of this video and I will answer them in the next one. Been liking putting up my training on my YouTube as well as my Instagram. I feel like, this might just be for my own ego, but I feel at least documenting my own training and my own progress lends some level of, I don't want to say authority because that's douchey, but something to back up that what I'm saying isn't completely useless. So it's mostly just for my own mental well-being. I feel like I'm saying some valuable shit, but response has been pretty good. They'll be getting a reasonable number of views, so I'll continue to do that. I'll keep fiddling with the format. Like I've mentioned a bunch of times, I'm finishing up school in a little bit less than a month, and at that point I will be coaching full-time. So aside from being able to go back to the level of correspondence with my guys that I look for and I prefer to be at, I will also be able to put a little bit more effort into these videos, especially those training log ones. So that's something to look forward to, I guess. But yeah, as always, if you guys have stuff you would like me to film, do changes to the video formats that are within my very limited video editing capabilities, also let me know in the comments of any video. I'll probably see it. I try to check every day. Yeah, I like, people ask me, like, they want to see, like, would I buy grocery shopping, maybe some cooking stuff. I'll happily do those as soon as I'm graduated and just have some time to, like, sit down and plan them out, because I can't quite ad-lib those like I do with these. So getting into the questions, pardon my 2 minutes of babbling. The first question was, have you ever experienced lower sternum pain while benching or doing dips? I have this on and off pain that stops me from exerting certain force due to pain, reoccurring after taking some time off. I don't bounce my bench, I lightly touch my sternum. Thank you for doing these. Someone said I used to have those in high school. I got sternum pain sometimes, but not bad. Okay, so usually I'm not a big fan of the I have a specific pain questions because A, I am not a physical therapist. I don't have formal training, right? So that's one caveat. But B, usually there aren't enough specifics, and I don't know their training, and I don't know their sporting background, I don't know their injury background. So even with my limited skill set as a non-medical professional, the chance that I say something correct is probably statistically pretty low. Especially with like less information provided, right? But I did experience, I used to get like pain in the center of my sternum when I did dips when I first started training when I was probably about 16. It is something I've grown out of, and so I have two predominant theories. Eugene mentioned in the comments that he got it and it went away. He felt it was probably due to like rib cage expansion during puberty. I would go out on a limb and guess you are younger as well. I experienced when I was younger, so probably one of two things is going on. Probably there's some sort of age-related effect there is option one that you'll likely grow out of, and I would probably continue training through because I don't think it poses a significant injury risk. Or basically there's a force running through your sternum that is something that you're not adapted to. Wolff's Law kind of dictates that when you expose your bones to certain stresses, they adapt to those certain stresses and increase in density. So like, let's just say you're exposing your sternum to a force that you haven't in the past. It's going to take some time to adapt, but applying the stimulus is exactly what you need to do to elicit said adaptation. So assuming it's not too debilitating, I would try to stay the course, kind of regulate as you need to. If it starts flaring up, maybe back down, but I would function under the assumption that you're either going to adapt to it or you're going to grow out of it. That would be my guess. Because I remember I had like this weird amount of pressure and like pain right in my sternum the first time I tried to do dips, which sucked because I always thought they looked really cool, but didn't stop high school Sam. Second question is, Why is it sometimes lifts feel very hard and slow, but watching the video they look pretty easy and smooth? Yeah, there's going to be a disconnect between objective difficulty and subjective difficulty. Sometimes if you're coming in with a lot of fatigue, you're coming in with like high life stressors, poor sleep, poor nutrition. Sometimes that seems to affect perceived exertion more than it actually impacts your ability to output force. I think that people can output a lot more force under suboptimal conditions than they think they can, because what they're feeling isn't necessarily reflective of reality. That is why I really recommend that, especially when you're learning, but even when you get more advanced, basing your RPE based on a combination of video review, but also the subjective feeling. There's certain things you might not be able to detect in the video that you could perceive while you were doing the lift, and those things are valuable, but I wouldn't base my RPE entirely based on one or the other. But sometimes it's just how it goes. If you didn't do a good job with your bracing, you didn't do a good job getting as tight as you possibly can. Sometimes the weight will feel a lot heavier, even though the bar speed will be somewhat similar. Using squat as an example, if you did a really great job with your bracing and you did a really good job with your upper back tension, sometimes the weight will feel really light. And if you did a poor job at those, the weight will feel quite heavy on your back and maybe a bit slow. But the bar speed between the two probably wouldn't be that different, or sometimes wouldn't be that different. Short answer is I don't know, but that's a real thing. Don't let it get in your head. Build confidence in your ability to move weights that didn't necessarily feel fast. Just because something's heavy doesn't mean you can't move it. Very helpful piece of advice that I got at some point. To lose 15 to 20 pounds of fat, is it better to do a dedicated cut, short but intense cutting phase, or a long body recomp? Thoughts on recomps in general? Okay, so this is very case by case. I'm seemingly like everything else. I'm hesitant to give recommendations without specifics because I'm not a big like universal rules guy. But that being said, if you have 15 to 20 pounds to lose, you're probably not going to do that in an isocaloric recomp. Unless you're on PEDs, that will take a obscene amount of time. But I would suggest a third option of a gradual cut, small caloric deficit, rather than a intense cutting phase. Generally speaking, I just see people's training go a little bit better, potentially a little bit less muscle loss. I think that if you can keep your performance high during a cut, if you can keep your strength from dwindling at all, generally speaking, that is enough to stave off any muscle loss that may have occurred otherwise. So I would recommend, if you do have 15 to 20 lose, a gradual cut, multiple gradual cuts, going 5 pounds at a time, followed by a maintenance phase, because metabolic adaptation is also a real thing. So if you did a prolonged cutting period, your metabolism is going to come down with time, and potentially having intermittent, like go 5 pounds, hit a maintenance phase, potentially you could see some upregulation of your metabolism. Thoughts on recomps in general? I think that doing very difficult strength-oriented training can drive more recomposition than many people think. I think most of the studies indicating that muscle gain outside of a caloric surplus being minimal. I think they weren't conducted on people who train as hard as maybe some people who are on the more extreme ends, and I think that more rigorous and demanding training, and also the amount of stimulus that a well-trained person is able to apply to their body is a lot more. So I'll use myself as an example, right? If I hit 405 for 10 on the bench, which I think I've done 2 or 3 times now, so it's not, I'm not saying this is some easy work for me, but I'm saying hypothetically, if I did that set, that is going to pose a much greater stimulus for adaptation than someone hitting 185 for a max effort set of 10. There's just more muscular damage there. So especially if you've been training for a while and you're moving loads that are maybe bigger than the people these studies have been conducted on, I think you can drive more recomposition in an isocaloric diet than people think, but not necessarily the best strategy if body composition is your main goal. I'd certainly think that through combination of conditioning work, maybe carb cycling, and rigorous strength training, you can drive a reasonable amount of body composition shift without your weight changing, though. Long-winded as always. Do you coach anyone stronger than you? Who has the strongest bench, squat, deadlift, overhead press, or are you king? Well, I have coached someone who totals more than me. Big Cole Smith, the I believe he still has the heaviest total ever done below 18, something Max was gunning for, and then the meets got canceled due to COVID. So at least I get to feel cool because either way, I coach the guy who has it. He's focused on other stuff now, getting his health in line, and I have a lot of respect for that. No beef with that at all, so I don't coach him anymore. But when I was working with him, I believe he squatted 850 in knee wraps and about 800 in sleeves, so more than me. That would be the biggest squat I've coached. And he totaled, I think he's still a bit ahead of where I'm at, so I'm not quite there yet. That's kind of a goal, is get back to the heaviest total I've coached being myself. Stay ahead of Max. I coach no one that benches more than me, sadly. So that would be me with 535. I coach two people that out deadlift me. Jasper, who I've posted on my Instagram a couple of times, had big, strong mongoloid. I think he pulled like 832 or something, in straps though, so he's a pussy, but that's a lot more than me. And then I coach on and off Josh Hatfield, who just recently got his pro card in strongman, and he has pulled over 8 myriad of times. So both of them outpull me. And then overhead press depends if we're talking with leg drive. If it's strict, that's me. If it's with leg drive, that would be Josh. In a previous video, you mentioned that you don't strictly use percentages RPEs for yourself or other people you coach. So how do you pick weights for a given training session? Based on, like, there's a certain, so I'll absolutely have a framework of percentages that I'm working off. I'm not going to lie and say I'm like artfully selecting everything in my head. There's definitely a structure, and deviations from that structure are partially based on like a formula with RPE, but partially subjectively. If I think that someone has a glaring form issue and I'm like, hey, if we put 30 more pounds on that bar for the following week's weight, that issue is going to become really pronounced, I'll probably put 20 pounds on the bar. So there's just a subjective level of me watching everybody's videos by hand. Whenever I'm able to, I'm going to be perfectly honest and say I haven't been able to watch as much training footage as I normally do, just during this semester, because I'm coaching so many people and have to finish up this last semester. But especially when I'm coaching full time, I watch every single video everyone posts of every work set, and I base their numbers based on what I see in the video. That being said, I am just deciding, I'm like, okay, their form looked what their form looks like. It wasn't significantly better or significantly worse. The RPE was about where I would like to see at this point in the training block. We're going to take a 5% jump as I usually would. But if I see anything that jumps out at me, whether it's really easy, really well executed, or really difficult, or if it was easy and there's a big glaring form issue, I'm going to deviate from that standard 5-ish% jump that I like to make week to week. So I hope that kind of answers it. I've never been very good at articulating exactly how the number selection works, because there is such like a level of subjectivity to it. A lot of it is just that I'm very familiar with my own programming, and I have a good sense for how things are supposed to be moving at different points within a 9 to 12 week training block, as I usually program. Yeah, so I hope that kind of answers the question. What are your thoughts on huge arch benchers? What do you think of the whole sumo is cheating? The big arches don't really bother me any. It's allowed within the rules. It's hard to do. There's a distinct skill component to it. It doesn't really bother me any. I think that it totally depends what you're comparing, right? So if you're comparing skill as a power lifter, right, or like proficiency as a power lifter, the weight that you do to whatever meets competition standard is how you determine that. So someone who benches 500 with a fat arch is better than someone who benches 475 with a massive ROM. That doesn't matter. But if we're gauging maybe strength, I think you could have a conversation there, but that's not to detract anything from the better power lifter. Just not my cup of tea. And then, what do you think of this whole sumo is cheating? Okay, so I've made some observations on this myself that I haven't put out on my YouTube, that maybe I could inform you guys and influence your thinking a little bit. So if we look at the IPF where they're pulling on a stiff bar, we don't see a massive gap between the sumo and the conventional pullers. We don't see all of the records exclusively being beaten sumo. You see a trend in the lower weight classes most of the better deadlifters tend to be sumo, but you know, you have outstanding pullers like Lamar Gant, who still, I think he still has the IPF record unless they reset the weight classes. But you see people putting up comparable numbers, both sumo and conventional, right? The super heavyweight deadlift record, I think, is Ray's still. That's done conventional. I don't know who has the world record, but I know the American record in the USAPL is held by the guy at my gym, Nate Alexander, my guy. That was done conventional. The 230 record, I think Ashton just broke that, if unofficially or officially. No, that's definitely Uzbeki. But Ashton's getting up there conventional. I think they're pretty comparable, and I don't think one poses a significant advantage over the other, outside just which suits your leverage is better when you're using a stiff bar. The trend seems to be that all of the records are swinging towards sumo in the untested or USPA tested feds where they use a deadlift bar. And I'm starting to speculate that, assuming you can do both at a high level of technical proficiency, which is a big assumption because people say, oh, if you think it's cheating, why don't you do that and pull more? Well, the reason they can't pull more is because they haven't practiced it. It's not necessarily because their leverages are making them better conventional necessarily. But that being said, it does seem that at the highest level, if you're able to pursue both at a high level, you're going to end up pulling more sumo, assuming you're able to execute it well. And that's just kind of the nature of a deadlift bar, right? If you do a technically proficient sumo deadlift, the most difficult portion of the lift is the bottom, right? It's pretty universally agreed on. And a deadlift bar basically removes the bottom ROM, not just makes it easier. By the time the weights are coming off the ground, you're significantly higher than you would be with a stiff bar. So it's more equivalent to a block pull stiff bar, right? And sumo block pulls are a meme lift, right? So it's definitely giving more of an advantage to the sumo pullers than it is the conventional pullers, and kind of putting a little bit of a gap between them. But that being said, I don't think it's cheating. It's within the rules. I have no less respect for sumo deadlifters. It's just something that I personally bear in mind, that they're probably getting more out of the deadlift bar than their conventional counterparts. So just something I would keep in mind. And what is your heaviest deadlift you've ever performed? Sumo, 765, and conventional, 755. The conventional was in straps, and the sumo was bare hand. Do you personally do sumo for powerlifting and not conventional? Yeah, my rationale has always been, when I did compete and when I will compete eventually again, I would do sumo just because it's easier for me. So I do all of my sumo pulling bare hand, and then I do my conventional training for whenever I want to do strongman, and in strongman you're allowed to use straps, so I do all my conventional pulling in straps for the most part. Right now I'm just kind of doing my conventionals bare hand for the first time in a very long time, just kind of seeing if I can match max for my own ego, but that's just kind of a side project I'm working on. And then last one, what are your thoughts about deadlifting and squatting in the same training session? Totally fine. People do it at a very high level. I program it myself. I don't usually do SBD days, but I will for people who have outside life factors that limit their training frequency within a week. I think that really, to maximize your bench development, maybe dedicating more time to it, like a full session, can sometimes be better. But if it means lowering your frequency, then if it means raising your frequency, performing squat, bench, and deadlift in the same session is a very valuable tool. It's done I have no problems with it. Just don't do it very often myself. I would say that I personally, for the people that I coach, usually have them, if you're going to perform a deadlift and a squat in the same session, I usually have people squat prior to deadlifting, because it's a lot easier to deadlift with tired legs than it is to squat with a tired back. And that is the order that you do them within a competition. So that being said, there's nothing wrong with it. As long as you're prepared for the session, you're prepared for the session. The ordering doesn't necessarily matter, as long as it's been consistent. I wouldn't change it halfway through a block without preparation, or do a very difficult day for the first time deadlifting before you squat, but it just comes down to what you're used to. Yeah, that's my video. Not as entertaining as the last one, but I hope I did all right. Everybody have a nice day.